when I have to think about what country made the most intense first impression on me, it has to be Nepal, almost instantly after I got out of the airport. People and motorcycles and noise and yelling and beauty and confusion about where exactly my address was in the city, and this feeling that I was stepping out into an open sea. That whatever I had imagined would happen and how things would look slowly drifted away as I entered Kathmandu. It's insane to think about how much of an impression that country made on me, how much everything changed when I saw the beauty of the country itself and its people, and how difficult it was to leave after my month stay there. This is the story about what Nepal taught me about video storytelling. I think Nepal was always on my bucket list, mainly for its colors and the feeling of adventure that those colors brought with them. It's this idea of going somewhere that's lost in time, where you're going to see, smell, and hear things that you can't find anywhere else in the world. But as much as it was on my bucket list, it was also a bit random, because I remember thinking to myself that here was an opportunity to go somewhere during my summer vacation, and after packing my bags, it just sort of made sense, like, yeah, Nepal's going to be the place to go. And I guess my entire trip to Nepal was sort of based around this idea that I've slowly come to realize happens quite often in life in general, and that's that if you take a rash and quick decision, things will always somehow end up sliding into place as long as you don't start regretting that decision. Because if you stick with it, you'll always find something there waiting for you, whatever that may be. And that's how I sort of went to Nepal on a whim, but I ended up realizing very quickly that I couldn't just stay there a month without actually doing anything. And like most people traveling to the country at the time, I also saw the damage that the earthquake, the infamous earthquake in 2016, had caused on the country, and decided to try and find some way to put the little filmmaking skills I had at the time to use. And so I reached out to a global NGO located within Kathmandu, read up on all the documents they had online about what they had done, what they still needed to do in order to form some sort of pitch, walked into the office and claimed that I had a meeting, even though I didn't, in the hopes that I would explain it later, and suddenly I found myself within the team, working with the people of the NGO to tell the stories of the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that had been left behind after the earthquake with no government assistance and really no hope of what to do in the future.
भाग्छु भन्दा भन्दै ढलाइहाल्यो पुरिएछ पुरियो अनि पुरिएपछि कसैले पनि देखेन अनि छोरीको छोराले यो फोटो देखेछ एउटा र अनि उहाँ रचिन आमा त यहाँ पुरिया रहेछ भनेर अनि खोतालेर झिकेर अनि यहाँ ल्याएको रे मलाई त थाहा छैन उनीमा पोको पारेर ल्याएको रे रगतै रगत थियो रे सासै फेर्न नसक्ने होसै नआएको.
And you can only imagine my excitement when that team told me that I would actually be able to travel with them around the country to tell the stories of real Nepali people, different from the ones that lived around the Airbnb where I was spending my time in Kathmandu, and getting to go to villages and mountains and talk directly to the people themselves. And so we set off. And I guess one of the first things that Nepal taught me about video storytelling is how to tell the stories of people who don't have the opportunity to do that themselves. Because this was my first time being tasked with going out to film people with who I had had very little time to get to know, and basically tried to tell the story about something that I couldn't imagine happening to me. But so I decided to prepare, reading a tiny bit online about structural damages, about land rights within the country, about government assistance and who got it under what conditions, and just trying to mentally form a picture of what to expect. And I remember heading up into the mountains to film the very first story that we did and getting the feeling that this was the adventure that I had been waiting for so long, driving up on the perilous mountain path, suddenly finding ourselves in this rich jungle. And I was told that somewhere in that village was a woman who didn't have the land rights needed in order to be able to claim a government subsidy, and that would be the first person that we would be filming for the project.
अब घरको चाहिँ त्यही सरकारले 15,000 दिएको छ त्यो 15,000 को जस्ता किन्यो जस्ता किन्नलाई नि नपुग्ने भएछ घर धराब छ घर बाहिर हेर्यो राम्रै भित्र गयो चोटामा गयो सबै धराबै धराब छ चारै सुर्काएको छ.
And I think that one of the things then, as a 22-year-old, that absolutely blew my mind was that somewhere in that village there was a story that I would be given the privilege to tell to a wider audience, and that perhaps I would be the only person that would share that story with the rest of the world. And one of the things that I realized very quickly when starting to film that first story was that there was nobody more justified to tell that story than the person themselves that had gone through it. This wasn't going to be the story of a heroic NGO coming in and saving the people of Nepal, but it was going to be a story of resilience and of struggle that would have to be told by the Nepali people themselves. And so that story wrapped up, and then we headed off to another location, this time a bit different, closer to Kathmandu, where it was the story of an elderly woman who had saved her husband after their house had collapsed on him and he couldn't find his way out. And this was also my first exposure to the Dalit community of Nepal, something like India's untouchable community. And instead of butchering an explanation, I'm going to put up a definition right now. This time things were a bit different, but it felt more crucial than ever to allow this community to tell its own story, especially after all of the things that I had heard about the Dalit community and the challenges they faced that were far outside of just getting a land subsidy or being able to build their house up again. And I think in that sense, when it comes down to telling the stories of people who had been through unspeakable destruction, I think one of the main things that I learned was you absolutely need to allow these people to tell their stories themselves. And at the same time, being incredibly respectful of both the destruction within the country, but also of the beauty still present within these communities. As I mentioned before, given the ability to tell the stories of these people that were so far away from what I was used to, with a different culture, different language, a different history, it wouldn't have made any difference if I had been given a bar of gold or an impactful story to tell, because for me at 22 years old, it filled me up with this incredible excitement to just film and learn from people and experiences. At the same time though, that's the problem, and it's something that I think we all have found ourselves or find ourselves in similar situations, and that's that just because you are the one that has been given the opportunity to tell a story does not necessarily mean that you are the right person to tell that story. I never really asked myself important questions like, did I spend enough time with these people in order to be able to tell their story? Was 30 minutes enough before starting to take out the camera and film and take out the tripod and slider and microphone? Was it properly explained to these communities and these people what we were doing and what the outcome was supposed to be and where it would lead? And even if it was I absolutely certain that everything I was doing and eventually maybe the money that would be gathered through funding would go to these communities? There were many, many questions that maybe understandably, but also not so much, I didn't ask myself at that age. And maybe most simply put, the biggest problem was that I didn't allow any of the people that I had filmed to see me first and foremost as a human being and then as a filmmaker. And I think All of this came to a standstill, to a big realization one day when I was asked by a friend of mine whether I wanted to go take photos at a nearby brick factory where children worked close to Kathmandu. And I remember I didn't question it at all. I immediately went into the mindset that I, particularly me, would be the person that would tell these stories and share them with the world and find some ways to communicate what was happening there. And I will show a few of the photos that I took and some videos, but for the sake of course, these being young children, I'm going to make sure to hide their identity as much as possible. And it was in this moment, running through the camp and thinking about lighting and composure and at what time I should probably head out to not risk getting caught, that I was perhaps at my most reckless and also disrespectful. Spending a few minutes speaking to each child before taking their photo, not asking about their name or their background or dreams or anything at all about their life. And then it was over and I left and I found myself back at my Airbnb in Kathmandu, and I started touching up details on their faces and on their skin tones and on the lighting. And then I suddenly realized that I had some growing up to do, that I would need to sit down and think long and hard about what approach makes sense in situations like this, and whether or not I had shown enough respect to the people that had given me a glimpse into their own lives. And ultimately, this led to my decision to put aside photography for the time being then, and start to focus more intensely on videography, because I told myself that with video, just by its very nature, I would need to take more time to get to know the communities, to get to know somebody before interviewing them, to not have the ability to just go somewhere, snap a few photos and leave, and that I would have to submerge myself to a level where I could actually show respect to the people that I am videoing for the project. And now, taking into account both things that I mentioned, both the aspect of needing to give people the opportunity to tell their own stories, and of course the benefits and the beauty that that has, but also not finding the right amount of time to show respect or to get to know someone or to just make somebody feel comfortable, the ultimate takeaway is this. Video storytelling is nothing without showing those that you are filming that you are there first and foremost as a human being that genuinely cares, and not just as a camera that comes and leaves as soon as the project is over. I'm sure for many people I don't have to say this, but take some time before everything you film. Introduce yourself without a camera. Sit down and have a conversation without a light stand. Ask questions without a microphone. Realize that you have one opportunity in most cases to tell a story, and don't screw it up.